is to find the values to make the car feel the way I want it to drive. Is that -4? Yes. So what I can do is, instead of making the suspension a lot softer, is I can adjust the brake bias to get the rotation that I want on the brakes. So what I'm noticing is that it's still not rotating the way that I want on the brakes, even with a significant spring adjust. Well, there it is. It's doing it a little bit right there. Again, not a corner I would normally brake in. It's still understeering. So I'm going to adjust the brake bias instead of the front spring. And the reason for that is, again, because of previous knowledge, that I know that a stiffer front spring is better for on-throttle performance. So what the stiff front spring does is it pushes the rear tires into the road more than a soft front spring. So when I get on throttle, the front end is more likely to push on throttle with a stiff front spring. And I don't want push, but I want stability on throttle. So I know I need a relatively firm, for the tires, a relatively firm front spring. And so I don't want to keep lowering the front spring until it rotates on the brakes. I want to move the brake bias back so that it rotates on the brakes with a stiff front spring. And the way to tell that you have either a too stiff a front spring or too far a rearward brake bias, excuse me, I burped, is if the car snaps loose on the brakes. So if the front spring was really stiff, it would understeer on the brakes. So then you move the brake bias further back, it will still understeer on the brakes if the front springs are too stiff, but it will then snap loose when you put in too much brake pressure. So you want to find a balance between front spring stiffness and rear brake bias. So now I'm pretty much at the limit of what I'm going to get out of the suspension on the brakes. What am I trying to say? Let me repeat that. I'm at the limit of what I'm trying to get out of the performance on the brakes in the suspension. I don't know if that made any more sense. But it's rotating on the brakes and it's stable coming off the brakes. I could probably use a little bit more initial torque lock for more stability coming off the brakes. But it's doing what I want on the brakes. So now, I haven't even adjusted the anti-roll bars. And I've achieved decent settings for the anti-roll bar settings that I have already. So what I'm going to do is switch from focusing my mind while I'm driving on what the front end is doing to now focusing my mind to what the rear of the car is doing. So that's on throttle. So it's rotating a lot on throttle with very little throttle input. That would suggest that I would need a softer rear spring. However, in Gran Turismo, it depends on how much body roll I'm capable of accepting in the performance of the car. So like I said, I haven't tuned the anti-roll yet. And so I'm just not going to do that in this video. Maybe I'll do it at the end, because I don't want to explain the whole setup feature. I just want to explain how I go about tuning suspension, which is starting with the front end and then moving to the rear suspension after I adjust the way the car performs on the brakes. So if I were to change the anti-roll, it would completely change how the front spring reacts on the brakes, because it changes the additive roll stiffness of the front end. So the roll stiffness is calculated from a combination of the anti-roll bar and the natural frequency of the spring. And if I change this, it's going to change the performance. So I'm not going to touch these for now. I was going to do cambers. I'll explain that later. The cambers, I'm going to leave it stock for now. So the car is oversteering a lot on throttle. Now a value I know I usually like with specific cars I've tuned in other sims is 1.8 natural frequency with low grip tires, which this minimum is 1.85. So I'm going to start there because I know that, I don't know that it's going to work with this car, but I know that with other cars, even other Porsches, that this value has worked before, and that's in other sims, particularly BeamNG and Automation and some other sims. But anyway, let's test this out, find out if what I expect is true. Okay, so I'm getting, with a soft rear spring, what I'm getting now is something called roll oversteer, where the car rolls so much that the inertia of the roll causes the car to oversteer. And that I need to tune out. And the only way to tune that out is with the anti-roll bars. So it means I'm going to have to adjust the anti-roll bars. Is it first gear? No, second gear. Just understeering. So I think the rear spring is too soft because it was understeering a lot there. Stay in third. And it's not rotating as much on the brakes anymore because of the softer rear spring as well. It's getting less oversteer on the brakes, and it's still very throttle sensitive. So making the rear spring really soft did not help the throttle sensitivity. And in fact, it made the oversteer worse because it now has roll oversteer where I just lift off throttle and it rolls so much, and then it's wobbling like this, and it's hard to catch even though I was going very, very slow for that section. Right, for those sections of corners, or that series of corners, I was going very slow, and it was very difficult to catch the oscillating left to right slides. So I'm going to have to adjust the anti-roll bar because I still want the soft rear spring for throttle sensitivity, but I want to reduce the body roll. I didn't think I was going to have to, but I do have to. And as I described before, I already know that equalizing the pressures of the left and right tires as much as possible increases maximum grip. So if you literally run the maximum possible anti-roll bar that either the physical limitations of the car will allow, or the actual limitations of the sim, if it's a sim, will allow, then you'll get more cornering grip. However, that will the stiff rear anti-roll bar can cause a lot of oversteer. So to compensate for a stiff rear anti-roll bar, you have to have a relatively stiffer front anti-roll bar as well, which I'm not going to tune. I just want the rear anti-roll bar. I'm testing this with the soft rear spring. Much less body roll. It's oversteering really smoothly, and that's something also to notice with having stiffer anti-roll bars, is that because it's controlling the weight shift, it slides really smooth, at least with the comfort tires. The sports tires, and I specifically chose to drive on comfort tires because I wanted to avoid the snappy nature of the sports tires and the race tires. It's something I have not been able to tune out of the cars in Gran Turismo. So I'm giving it throttle, and like a lot of sloppy throttle there, and it's not snapping loose. So generally you would think that if it has a stiff anti-roll bar, at least if you're familiar with tuning, but not too familiar I guess, that the stiff anti-roll bar in the rear would cause a lot of oversteer. But I'm giving it really bad throttle inputs, and it's actually got more grip. And that is because of the soft spring. So the actual roll stiffness, like I said, of the car is a combination between the anti-roll bar and the springs. even though it has a stiff anti-roll bar, I'm making the same point over and over again, but using different words. The rear spring is compensating for the roll stiffness of the anti-roll bar, making the total roll stiffness softer. So now I can test the brakes again. The car is driving somewhat closer to what I want, whatever ideal is. I think this is third with the stock transmission. And it's very stable on throttle now. I can just mash the throttle and it's, oh, can't take that at full speed yet though. I can just mash the throttle and it sticks. That's because the weight is shifting back on the soft rear spring in conjunction with a stiff anti-roll bar, which is connecting both inside and outside tires to the road really well. That's why I've mentioned before, if you've seen my other videos, I like the stiff anti-roll bar and soft rear spring usually, but with the grippier tires, it doesn't work, is what I'm trying to say. So it's a little bit oversteery off throttle, so I can use a little bit more initial torque. Or what I can do is increase the front anti-roll. So it's oversteering mid-corner a lot. And I mentioned if I increase the rear anti-roll, I should probably increase the front anti-roll. And I think that's what I have to do, which is going to change, again, all the settings that I previously reached to something else. So if I was at 4 and 4 in the anti-roll bar, I had achieved close to ideal settings that made the car feel the way I wanted on the brakes. But now I'm going to increase the roll stiffness of the front end, so the front springs now have to be changed to compensate for the stiff or front anti-roll bar. So what I'm going to do is change the anti-roll bar. This video is already getting pretty long. I don't know how long I'm going to make it. I want to get pretty close to good settings, but I'm not going to fine-tune everything, because that will take a very long time to get every exact value that I want. So I already know, I mentioned I already know that I wanted a maximum stiffness anti-roll bar in this car. However, I also already know that somewhere around 4 to 6 is pretty good in other cars. So I'm going to start with values that I already know. I also know that with race cars, 10 in the rear and 9 in the front is pretty good with the race tires. Still snappy, but it corners well. And this car, because of its weight distribution, may be in the 6, 7, and 8 range in the front. But I'm going to start with a 6. I haven't even touched the dampers yet, by the way. As you can see, this is already starting to get a little bit convoluted, because there's so many more aspects of the car that need to be changed just by changing one point of the car. So what just happened there was oversteer. The tires may have been cold, I don't know. I don't know how this game simulates tire temperatures and stuff. It doesn't really display that information. Let's see what happened. I'm getting actually more rotation with the stiffer anti-roll bar in the front. So that doesn't really prove it, but it adds evidence to the theory that having more anti-roll creates more grip in the car. It doesn't just distribute grip from the front end to the rear end, it creates more grip that wouldn't be available with soft anti-roll bars, because it connects the inside tire to the road better. So I'm getting some good rotation, getting a little bit understeer. Again, I'm not particularly driving very well. A lot of off-throttle rotation. So even though it gained more grip with the front anti-roll bar increase, there is a point where the anti-roll stiffness will create understeer. And I think I need to increase the anti-roll bar in the front. So I'm getting a lot of rotation. And then understeer off throttle. Nope, there it goes, nope. Oversteering off throttle. I was wrong. Just slow to react. So now I'm getting closer to ideal settings, and it's hard for me to tell just what exactly the car is doing. It's very much based on the fidelity of my inputs and whether or not I'm actually driving the car well. So I'm getting strange, it's hard to tell what it's doing. It's understeering on the brakes, like with more pressure, more brake pressure is understeering. And then coming off the brakes, it starts to rotate more. It suggests that I need more initial torque lock. Is that second gear? I don't think so. I have to shift right out of the exit. Oh. So now I can tune the car to preferred settings because it's performing close to what I want, but not exact. And what I want is more rotation caused by the suspension on the brakes. And then what I want to do with that extra rotation on the brakes is put in more differential braking lock to make the slide on the brakes smooth. So if I get the car to rotate purely on the suspension and open differential, it's going to be snappy. The open differential usually makes any slides snappy. And locking the differential, in most cases, at least with these Comfort soft tires, makes slides smooth. That's already understood in the drifting community, is if you want to drift well, just weld the diff, right? A welded diff in the sliding situations performs better than an open differential. So it also applies to racing situations where you don't have a welded diff or a full locked diff, is that if I lock the diff more, it's going to improve sliding performance. So I'm going to change two things. The front spring and the braking lock. I'm going to make big adjustments. Well, not on the front spring, but big adjustments on the braking lock. It's already at 45 actually, so it might be fine. I will just change it to 50. So I'm going to make a small adjustment on the braking lock and change this to 72. I don't know how it's going to perform at 70 either, because I tested that with a different anti-roll stiffness. But I'm going to go to 72 to find out if that's a good setting on the brakes, for braking performance, that is. And then I'm going to lock this up to 50. And instead of trying to open this up to get open the braking sensitivity lock to get more rotation on the brakes, I'm going to change the front spring to get more rotation on the brakes. And that's because, again, I said earlier, more lock in the differential creates smoother slides. And so I want it to slide smoothly. That requires a more locked differential. So it's sliding a lot. I barely tapped the brakes. Might be cold tires. Try it again. So, and actually, the reason why someone might want, or including me, might want, oh shoot, early shift, more braking differential lock, is because I don't want too much speed difference between the left and right tires on the brakes. So if you notice in F1, they lock the front tires. There's no differential on the front end of a F1 car. It's just free spinning tires on the front wheels. What am I trying to say? The front end of an F1 car has free spinning wheels. So when they press the brakes, the left and right tire can go any differing speed that the brakes may cause. That's why they lock. That's why they can lock the inside tire. So it can happen in the rear tires too of a rear-wheel drive car, and it's not desirable. So if I have more braking lock, it prevents inside tire wheel lockup on the brakes, and that's a good thing. So I actually want to get the car to oversteer from the suspension rather than oversteer from the differential lock. With the race tires, it's completely different because there's so much grip on the race tires that you just have to open up the differentials. I think this video is getting kind of long, but I'm going to keep going. I'm going to try this in a second. So again, it's really good on throttle. It's not perfect, but it's really close to ideal. Nice rotation off throttle. So I could use more initial torque lock. Should I take this in third? Okay, that was a bad throttle input, but it didn't spin. So it didn't snap loose, but it is still a little loose. So now the tires are warm, it didn't just oversteer into that turn. So now I have to do a lot of laps to really tell what the car is doing. This is why it's going to take exponentially longer to optimize the car to its optimum settings, because it's optimized, right? Because I have to drive a lot of laps and make very little changes to the car to figure out what the car is actually doing. And I'm getting close to the end of this video because I'm reaching that point where it's going to take a lot of driving to figure out what the car is doing. Okay, a little bit too much rotation on the brakes. I want more stability, and I don't want to change the brake bias to achieve that. I could increase the anti-roll stiffness, but I kind of don't want to. I still want the front end to bite really well. But I'm going to increase this. It went from 75 to 72 to 74. See, it's a very, very small increase, and I may find that it changes the car from a little bit too oversteery to a little bit too understeery. And then there's a lot of different adjustments that I can make to achieve the settings that I want, the closer I get to ideal settings. Tires are cold, it's just oversteering through there. Couldn't tell what the car was doing. Good rotation. And again, I wouldn't try to achieve a fast lap by sliding the car like that, but I'm trying to slide the car to see how it performs over the limit. Yeah, I don't like second in that corner. I'm going to try staying in third again in that one. I know this is third. So notice I just turn the wheel more and it like rotates real nice. Oh. So this right here, what I'm experiencing, that I've diagnosed personally. I don't know if this game can achieve it, but I've diagnosed that as too soft dampers. So I'm going to try what Erman said with the dampers. I'm going to try and just increase the front dampers to see if that helps the performance of the car. But it's getting into weird wobbles because the dampers are too soft. I can iron out the wobbles with better steering inputs and better throttle inputs, but I want a car that I can drive sloppy. Get second here, and if I have really stiff dampers, I can drive it really sloppy. So anyway, I think I'm just going to do the dampers and do one more driving session. And if you want to optimize this car, you can do that in your own time, but this is going to take a very long time from this point out to achieve the perfect settings. I'm going to finish this lap, adjust the front dampers, and see what happens. A little too much rotation coming off the brakes, so initial torque needs to go higher. And I'm going to change that too. So the dampers and the initial torque. Okay. And as you tune cars more frequently or more in-depthly, you will be able to tell what item of the tuning, what part causes what specifically. So I know this generally affects mid-corner. So it was at 20, then went to 15. So I'll go to 18. No, it was at 30, went to 15. So I'll go to, half of 15 is 7-ish. I'll go to 8. 7.5 is half of 15. Okay, so 23. And then what was it? Dampers. There we go. And I'm going to see what this does. I should probably not change that, but what was it at? It's at 40. Okay, let's leave it at 40. Just change the compression because the expansion will change the throttle performance. And the compression changes the diving situation performance. So when the car is slowing down or turning left and right. Yeah. Using the stick shift, not the paddle. Oh, wrong gear. So the initial torque is probably too stiff. It's understeering off throttle now. But that was actually better than the rotation, having too much rotation off throttle. Taking a long time to make it through that turn. I think that's the initial torque. It's too stiff or too locked. Stay in third. Mash the throttle and it sticks. A little bit of oversteer right at the throttle input. Excuse me, getting a little burpy. I noticed this chair causes me to burp a lot. I think it's the curve in my back. So it's just a Sparco seat. Nice rotation on the brakes. So it's still wobbly. I'm getting roll oversteer. Roll oversteer caused that, even though I had the, the stiffer front damper. I think it's because of it's an unbalanced roll. So generally, in soft sprung, low grip cars, I would like 80% critical damping in the front for both the compression and the rebounds, and then 60% compression in the rear, and then 80% rebound, what's it called? What am I trying to say? Critical damping. Not compression, critical damping. So that's 80% front on both compression and rebound, and then 60% on the rear compression and 80% on rear rebound. But the rebound damping limits the rolling effect, reduces the weight transfer, so that I can run softer suspension essentially with stiffer dampers. So I'm going to do another drive. I'm going to push this to maybe the maximum hour that and that was past the maximum hour. I think I'm going to cut it short here. There's more tuning to be done. That wasn't exactly a really good tune. What I am going to do is my usual maximum damper, because it's only 40% what you call compression and 50% expansion. I'm going to do a quick drive. I haven't even got to cambers yet. So I'll just explain cambers right now. The reason why I'm staying off the topic is because in order to optimize camber angle on a car, you have to be very, very consistent. If you're not consistent, there's no way to tell if the camber angle you're choosing is actually making the car faster. So you have to be able to run almost exactly perfect laps, like consecutively, before you can optimize negative camber angle. So what I am going to do is just explain to you that what I found in other sims after spending a lot of time driving is that there's a range between 2.5 and 3.2 in low grip cars, not high grip cars with wide tires, low grip cars with narrow tires. Around that range, 2.5 to 3.2, that the car can operate comfortably in. And what I just do, because I never spend time optimizing cambers because it takes way too long and it's boring. You're just trying to run perfect laps over and over again. I just go to 2.8. That's my strategy. And that's what I'm gonna do right now. So what I did was I maximized the dampers and increased the camber. So the Porsche usually, a Porsche anyway, usually has wider rear tires. This particular Porsche does not have, it has wider rear tires, but it's not super wide. It's not like a 300 millimeter tire. So probably a 2.5, not 2.5, 255 or something like that millimeter wide tire. I'm driving distracted. So I noticed the car oversteered in that turn, but it could have been the first turn, or the last turn on the track, but the first turn in the session. It oversteered, and it's oversteering a lot. But it's stable oversteer. And the damper is changing the loading effect on the car, so it has essentially a stiffer rear roll stiffness. I just completely missed the brake zone there. And I'm going to end it with this last clip. This is a add-on that I'm going to have to edit on the back of the hour-long session. And it's oversteering a little bit too much, so what I would do is instead of reducing the dampers, I'll increase the anti-roll from 6, I think it's at 6 right now, to 7, and then test it at 7, and then if it's too soft still, I'll change it to 8, and it's probably going to be good around 7 or 8. There's still a lot of time that needs to be put into this car to make it drive exactly the way I want. I could never get it perfect, but really close to perfection, right? But it's going to take just significantly way more time. And I'm going to end it here. Thanks for watching. Till the next one.